Friends, I bring you greetings on behalf of all New Democrats. As leader of the New Democratic Party, I want you to know that we are allies in combating online hate. We have seen the rise in hate directed against various communities. We've seen anti-Asian hate. We know that anti-Black racism is very present. We know that hate against Indigenous people, against the LGBTQ community, against Muslims, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, they are all rising, they're all present in our society. And we know that online hate is used to radicalize, to inflame, and to incite hatred and violence against many communities. I've always said that hate is like a fire. Once it's allowed to take hold, it spreads, consuming everyone. And that's why we all have a responsibility to stand together against hate, to give it no space to take hold and no air to breathe. So New Democrats believe we need to tackle online hate with clear legislation that allows us to remove misinformation, divisive, or hateful messages wherever they are on social media platforms. Remove those immediately. We also need to use more resources to dismantle the groups that are spreading hateful messages, white supremacist groups and extreme right-wing groups that incite hatred, that radicalize people, and that are one of the causes of the increase in hate. Together, we can tackle online hate and build a more inclusive Canada and a more inclusive world. New Democrats, you can count on us as your allies to fight with you, to support you, and to fight for a more inclusive world.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Yusuf Siraj, and I'm here with you on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. From the bottom of my heart,
good afternoon, everyone,
based on
and thank you
increased
for joining us
understanding
today.
of their
My name is
culture,
Yusuf Siraj,
their background, their
I'm here with
history,
you
and
on
their
the
people,
traditional
I want to
unceded
thank them
territory.
for taking care of this land and for passing it to us to help with them to build a beautiful and bright future for everyone. Today's event is one of incredible and extreme importance and highest urgency. We are here today to talk about supporting legislation to combat online hate. In Canada and around the world, we have seen such a rise in hate. It has reached disastrous levels, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Minister Guilbeault, the Canadian Minister of Heritage, had prepared a message for us to start off today to address this issue. However, as is often the case with such nuanced and fast-changing challenges, we were requested to postpone sharing that video. Suffice it to say, both the minister and the federal government are committed to protecting Canadians and Canadians' well-being as their number one priority. Today's forum will be shared with the government and all political parties in Canada in order to help inform and support the movement for online anti-hate legislation. Because online hate has offline consequences, it seems every day there is a new case of anti-Asian racism, anti-Black discrimination, anti-Indigenous hate, or attacks against other members of a BIPOC community. During COVID-19, the most dramatic outcome of this online activity was the January 6th, 2021 insurrection against the United States government. Online hate has been escalating for years. In 2017, at a mosque in Quebec City here in Canada, an attacker, a terrorist, killed 6 people and injured 5. It was widely reported that the social media platforms that he used, including 8kun, 8chan, as well as more traditional mainstream social media networks, helped him with the organization of his ideology and the propagation of this attack. Social media has been used to orchestrate genocide in countries such as Myanmar and religious persecution in countries in the subcontinent. In the 2019 Christchurch mosque attack, which resulted in the deaths of 51 people, including a 3-year-old child, and injuring over 40, the terrorist in that case was radicalized online. Bad actors may claim that efforts to remove online hate may stifle free expression. However, especially in today's world, they're taking a matter of life and death into their hands. Recently, President Biden was saying that people spreading anti-vaccination content online, of which 12 people were responsible for over 60%, is causing deaths. Social media companies have come under increased fire for not enforcing their own at-scale policies surrounding hate speech and leading to toxic and radicalizing outcomes. Removing hate speech online, or at least creating a context where it could be better regulated, will help to protect the free expression of rights of women, BIPOC members, LGBTQ plus persons, religious and racialized minorities, as well as prioritizing their right to be part of the conversation, not the right of transnational ideologues such as white supremacists. Policies across all social media platforms are inconsistent. They are sorely lacking and in need of regulation, resulting in hate spreading faster than ever before. We are hosting this forum today with our co-hosts at the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, the Chinese National Council for Social Justice, CCNCSJ, as well as the Mosaic Institute, in order to educate, inform, and support our government, our leaders, our legislators in developing practical, real solutions and making Canada a leader in addressing online hate. Today's event is going to be a combination of both speakers and panelists. Our very first speaker, who I'm really happy to have here today, all the way from London, England, so thank you for staying up and joining us, Vidya, is Vidya Ramalingam, the founder of Moonshot. She is the founder and CEO, and Moonshot is an organization that uses technology to end online harms. They apply evidence and ethics and human rights to their mission. She led the European Union's first intergovernmental initiative on far-right terrorism and extremism, which was initiated by the governments of Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, and the Netherlands. And she worked in partnership with the EU Commissioner for Home Affairs. Vidya regularly advises governments and tech companies on responding to online hate, terrorism, and violence. And she's an expert in the field of using data to better understand the online ecosystem. We're very grateful to have you here today with us, Vidya, and please, why don't you just start our event?
Thank you so much, Yusuf. I'm going to do my best now to share my screen. Let's just see if this works. Unfortunately, it's telling me that a host has disabled participant screen sharing. Is that something that we can easily fix?
Please try again.
Yusuf. Great, it's working now. Great, hopefully you're all seeing to join you all. As mentioned, my name is Vidya Ramalingam. I'm founder and CEO of Moonshot. And what I want to do today is just bring some evidence to the table around the scale of hate and engagement with hate content in Canada. We as an organization are an organization that works with governments and also with the tech companies, as well as with community organizations to respond to hate, to violent extremism, and other online harms. And we work internationally, not just in countries like Canada. We have a team of engineers, of data scientists, psychologists, mental health workers, and civil liberties experts. And what we do is we build technology to do two things. So one is to build the evidence base around the scale of online harms and violence and disinformation. But we also directly engage with audiences that are posting hate content online, that are interacting with hate content online. We work to ensure there are safer alternatives available to people that are consuming this content, but also try and intervene and try and pull people away from lives of hate and violence. And I should maybe start by saying here, I'm not a technologist by trade or by training. My background is really in the fight against white supremacy and hate and very much across the globe. About 12 years ago, I spent 2 years embedding myself essentially with a group of white nationalists as an anthropologist, really looking to understand what motivated people to join movements like that and ultimately to leave. And since then, I have dedicated my career to working to get people out of hate movements. And for me, technology and the online space gives us the power to reach people who are going down this path and to try and change their paths. Moonshot's been working to counter hate against communities online across Canada for the past 4 years. Before I dive into some of the data that we've gathered in partnership with various organizations across Canada and as well as with the Canadian government, I want to start by saying a few words about the unique moment that we're in, a moment of crisis in many ways. Hate actors and any extremists really thrive on moments of crisis. Their ideology is really premised on this notion that a race war is coming, and on what has been called by these movements accelerationism. That's one of the terms that's been used. It's this idea that white supremacists should try and increase civil civil disorder and contribute to the deliberate polarization and breakdown of society and breakdown of the political order. So oftentimes we see that crises are these moments where hate actors are grasping to take some of that fear and that anxiety in society and turn that into an opportunity for them to grow and for them to break down society as we know it. Now, we're in a unique moment in recent history. I mentioned a moment of crisis in many ways. We're facing multiple concurrent crises. The pandemic is just one of those, each compounding the other. And this has led to high levels of public anxiety and a clear opportunity for extremists to exploit, not just in Canada, but in many countries across the globe. Now, when the pandemic began last spring, we were running a project in partnership with Public Safety Canada to understand the scale and spread of attempts to access far-right hate content across the nation. We tracked a 19% increase in attempts to access far-right hate content in Canada's 6 largest cities, and you can see the cities that we were tracking this in here. Like many Canadians, individuals that were engaging with hate content were doing this more so under lockdown, under stay-at-home measures during the pandemic. We found in particular average weekly searches for specific types of violent far-right content, so in particular for radio and podcasts, increased by 330% and increased by 324% for violent hate-based video games, so attempts to access these sorts of video games on search engines. This was all during the period that we studied. So as I mentioned, just as we are all online more as a result of the pandemic, so are hate actors. And this has positioned us in a very delicate moment. Throughout this year, we've been in a state of heightened extremist activity online. And what the tech companies are doing to respond is simply not enough. Removal of content is hugely important to create safer online spaces that are less likely to be abused by far-right extremists and hate actors. However, content removal won't stem far-right violence on its own, and this is for 3 reasons. The first is the large majority of hate content, as according to the terms of service of policies of many of the tech companies today, the large majority of that hate content remains ineligible for takedowns. And this is according to the terms and service and policies of the tech companies, both large and small. Oftentimes, groups that are posting this content walk the line to keep their content online, and they do that incredibly well. But secondly, when this content is removed, when hate content is removed, importantly, the post, the video, or the account is deleted, but not the individual who posted it. That person still exists and may either continue to repost online or may move to another platform or may be deeply vulnerable and pose a threat to the community around them. And the third reason why moderation is not enough on its own is that there are still many spaces on the internet which are just not even liable for takedowns at all, and where this content can thrive. And I'm going to give you one example. This was a search that was entered into Google by an individual the day after the Christchurch attack in March 2019, which left 51 people dead. Brenton Tarrant is the name of the perpetrator, and this same search was replicated across the globe, not only in New Zealand itself, but across dozens of countries, numerous languages, and across search engines. Moments like this are not liable for takedown. A Google search can't be removed or blocked. And more often than not, when you search for violent extremist content on Google, it presents in the top search results. So we need not only better regulatory frameworks to ensure that hate content is removed, but also longer-term proactive solutions to really stem hate and violent extremism online and offline. Now, what does our data tell us about extremism in Canada online, and specifically hate speech? Over the course of a year, so this is from March 2019 to March last year, we monitored attempts to access hate speech and far-right extremism via search engines. And this is across the entire country. We found high volumes of this search traffic per capita, specifically in British Columbia, in Ontario, and in Alberta, with the greatest proportion of hate being directed towards Muslim, Jewish, and Black Canadian communities. We also found that Canadians aged 25 to 34 were the most likely to search for this far-right extremist content online, and specifically far-right conspiracies about immigration and about Jewish elites dominated the search traffic. We also detected significant volumes of high-risk searches, so specifically searches where users typed into a search engine, "I want to kill," followed by the name of a particular ethnic group. There was in particular, and I mentioned the Christchurch shooting earlier, there was in particular across Canada widespread interest in an anti-Muslim song that had been played by the Christchurch shooter, which advocates for the murder of Muslims and is often circulated by far-right groups online. And because we build longitudinal data sets and because we monitor engagement with extremist content around real-world events, we have time and time again seen a similar trend play out. And this is the case across the globe and also in Canada. When violence takes place offline, it tends to escalate engagement with hate online. So for example, after the horrific killing of a Muslim Canadian family last month, we found the same song that I just mentioned, the song that was played by the Christchurch perpetrator, that anti-Muslim song, we found that that same song was being shared in violent extremist forums online amongst Canadian audiences, specifically in extremist groups affiliated with Canada. Hate actors have also deliberately adapted their narratives and they propagate conspiracy theories based on current affairs. And I'm going to move on to another slide, but just so you know what you're looking at here, this is a breakdown by province and territory of attempts to access violent far-right search traffic across Canada over the course of a year. So I mentioned that these hate actors are very deliberately creating conspiracy theory narratives that build on hot button issues that they know that the general public are going to have strong feelings about. We tend to see a clear cycle in the distribution of conspiracy theories, especially those that are targeting certain communities. We tend to see these sorts of disinformation efforts are seated on fringe platforms like 8kun and 4chan, where there's very little to no moderation. And by design, we see these actors pushing these narratives, deliberately selecting conspiracy theory narratives that reflect the news media cycle, that deliberately attract attention. And they craft narratives which position some groups as inherently evil and others as good. So it's very much based around black and white thinking and pitting communities against one another. And then there's oftentimes an effort to deliberately push these narratives into the mainstream. We then tend to see, as mainstream media begins to pick up on some stories related to these narratives, the tech companies might then crack down. And then once again, the actors that are pushing these narratives get pushed back onto the fringe platforms. By this time, it's too late. The narratives that have been pushed out by these groups have already done their damage. And sometimes even we see those narratives spilling over into real world violence. So how can we combat online hate speech, online incitement to violence, and the disinformation that tends to underpin some of these narratives online? Well, there's some work that needs to be done, as mentioned, to promote better moderation on tech platforms. And that includes the enforcement of anti-harassment policies on major platforms. And we obviously need to be engaging in proactive and targeted deplatforming of content that promotes incitement against certain communities. There also have to be some interventions that are delivered directly with those who are engaging hate content online. So again, this has to go just beyond moderation as well. The key to intervening online is to distinguish as much as possible between different types of actors and different types of threats that we're dealing with. Now, there are genuinely some individuals in Canada that are inciting violence and hate against people of color, and the Canadian legal system needs to be equipped to handle those cases. My firm belief is that anyone below that threshold who might just be encountering this content online, engaging with it, is someone who I want to try and change. Now, as mentioned, most of my career has been dedicated to the delivery of social work methods to pull people out of hate groups, and specifically white supremacy. So my work has always been based on the fundamental belief that change is possible, even for those that we think might be too far gone. And over the years, I've worked with dozens of individuals who have left white supremacist and hate movements. And you'll hear later in this session from my dear friend, Tony McAleer, based in Canada, who set up an organization entirely set up by former neo-Nazis who are now anti-racist activists and who help others leave these ideologies behind. Now, the internet presents great opportunity to interact with people who might be going down this path and to try and plant the seeds for that change, to connect them in with organizations that can do that work with them. So for the hardened ideologues, for people that are supporting hate groups and maybe even buying into white nationalist ideologies, they require these targeted intervention efforts. And there are some great organizations working across Canada to deliver social work interventions with these kind of people. So it'll be really critical that we connect people online, audiences that are engaging with hate online, with these kinds of programs offline. But then going further down the spectrum, There's wider portions of the Canadian public, it might even be people that you and I know, who might be coming into contact with disinformation or conspiracy theories targeting specific communities. For those audiences, the intervention online needs to look really different. What we need to be doing is building more critical media consumption skills, educating and challenging misperceptions, which can underpin hate, and offering information which specifically dismantles some of the disinformation efforts that have been pushed against minority communities. But first and foremost, anything that we do online obviously needs to be coupled with strong and clear messaging from political leadership that hate and disinformation and incitement to violence targeting these communities is unacceptable. And the importance of hearing this from political leadership can't be emphasized enough. Anything we do online really has the potential to be unraveled if there are conflicting messages coming from our leaders. So just a final few points to end here. We at Moonshot are really proud to add our voice to this forum and to call for greater safeguards against online hate speech in Canada. Each of us plays a role in helping to end these kinds of online harms and the real world violence that they produce. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today. I will stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you very much, Vidya. Again, the work you're doing is amazing. It's awesome. It's so needed. We have an anecdote to share that we were walking through, my colleague Tarek, who's on this call, we were walking through the VPD offices and they had your reports on their desk. And I was like, hey, I know those. So the impact is there. People are engaged with the information. And again, there's so much that we need to educate the public, educate our leaders, educate our communities on. And we appreciate your incredible contribution to that field. Thank you so much, Vidya. Our next session will now transition into the panel portion of our event. Our first panel is about lived experience and what it's like to be a victim of online hate. Our panel moderator is Rachel Mansell. She's the Vice President of Operations at the Mosaic Institute. At the Mosaic Institute, they believe that everyone has the right to be free from prejudice and discrimination, and they support that belief by equipping people with the tools to dismantle prejudice in their own communities, whether through research, dialogue, policy, or training. Rachel completed her education at Western University and her master's at the University of Toronto. Since inaugurating Mosaic's Master of Global Affairs internship in 2012, Rachel has held a number of positions at the institution, rising up to become the Vice President of Operations. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. You'll be the first panel moderator, and I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you so much, Yusuf, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening on this really important topic. You know, as a Canadian institution, we usually begin with an acknowledgement of the Indigenous land on which we gather together, and these acknowledgements are a really important part of our ongoing commitment to unlearn, build relationship with Indigenous peoples, and just create networks of understanding. But you know, this is a virtual event, and we're all distributed across the world, different parts of Canada, including countries that have entirely different histories of settlement and development. So therefore, you know, at Mosaic, we just encourage everyone to look up the Indigenous heritage of your local community, wherever you might be, and reflect on those relationships between the First Peoples of your area through to everyone that now calls that place home. Our office is located in Takaranto, or Toronto, and it's located on the ancestral and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and Mississauga of the New Credit. Mosaic's team, though, is also distributed across this land of what we now know as Canada. And we, together as a team, celebrate the ancestral and traditional lands of the Algonquin, Anishinaabe, Attawandaron, Blackfoot, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, Lenape, and Mississauga of the New Credit peoples. I've been working on my pronunciation, so I hope everyone can bear with me as I work through them. I myself am joining you today from London, Ontario, which is a traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Lenape peoples that have long-standing relationships with the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. The local First Nations communities of this area include the Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, the Oneida Nation of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation. Additionally, there's a growing urban Indigenous population who make the city of London home. We all know that online hate is a problem. That's why we're all here today. That's why we're here supporting this event. And the numbers are staggering, as we just heard from Vidya. Last year, Mosaic conducted research in Ontario about personal experiences with online hate. And we found that 92% of the people that we surveyed felt uncomfortable because of something negative that they experienced online about their race or ethnic origin. 76% had witnessed online hate speech towards Black, Indigenous, Jewish, and Muslim communities. People generally agreed that social media posts promoting physical violence against certain communities are increasing. And 1 in 5 of the people that we surveyed sought mental health support for harmful and hateful content that they experienced via the internet. But these are facts. And through this panel, we really wanted to share the real impacts of online hate through personal stories. And I'm so grateful to be joined here today by Issa and Naima. Thank you both so much for being willing to share your experiences with online hate to help our audience understand the real impact that it has on everyday lives. So I'm just going to introduce our 2 panelists briefly, and then we're going to get into our conversation. Issa is an Anishinaabe Two-Spirit comedian and producer whose roots lay in Couchiching First Nation, Ontario. They use comedy as a tool in dealing with racism, homophobia, and sexism. They are the co-founder and producer of Woke Comedy Hour, voted the #1 comedian in the 2019 and 2020 United's Top 30. They are a member of the newly founded BIPOC Art Collective, Take Home, which is located in Artspace. Naima is a Somali refugee to Canada who is an educator, teacher, and anti-racism researcher. She has a master's degree in education from Otterbein University. Naima is passionate about education, advocacy, youth empowerment, and facilitating allyship to address systemic issues. In 2021, she became the president of the Somali Canadian Centre of BC. Thank you both for joining us today. So I'm going to do my best to facilitate a conversation among the 3 of us. I'm going to start off by asking you both some questions. Feel free to answer and also to converse with each other as well, and I'll jump in from time to time as well. So my first question is really just to help our audience understand these experiences. So what does online hate look and feel like to you? And can you give us some examples of things you've experienced or seen and heard?
Sure. I think online hate looks like a whole lot of ignorance. So people who aren't educated in ways of, in my experience and what I experience as an Indigenous person, is anti-Indigenous hate. So a lot of the online hate that I experience is, people coming up with stereotypes. So people saying, you're an alcoholic, you shouldn't have children, you get everything for free, your people should have been eradicated, residential schools was a good thing. And then recently, with the unearthing of children's bodies being found at residential schools across Turtle Island, people saying that, that's not murder, that's just solving a problem. So that's really just a small portion of some of the online hate that I experience. Just because I'm a vocal person, I'm an activist, and I do promote a lot of anti-racist work, and that's, that comes with the territory, unfortunately. But I think, as a First Nation person, I am, working to change that.
Okay, I think I unmuted myself. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Thank you. To me, online hate can look like spreading or inciting hate against an individual or group based on perceived negative characteristics. If left unaddressed, it can lead to acts of violence and hate crimes. It can feel like an atmosphere of hostility where boundaries between online and offline are blurred, and where there's little individual accountability. Sadly, hate speak and trolling became more common online, and people feel like they can say whatever they want because there's no consequence to their hate speech. Some of the experiences that I've had is from outside of my social media. So like my pages are private, but when I interact with a public page, and because my profile shows me wearing a hijab, some may label me as a terrorist, belonging to like a religion that promotes violence. I've been labeled as oppressed. Hey, you know, you're in Canada or you're in America, you don't need to wear the hijab, just take it off. So regardless of whatever comment I made, and it had nothing to do with religion or me being in a country that I was trying to be in, but basically they just see my profile and then like, you know, tag my name because I was commenting on that and just be like, hey, by the way, you know, you're here, like you're in the West now, you're in Canada, you don't need to wear that scarf. And then luckily, you know, some people do defend me. It's not your business, you know, stay out of her business or stuff like that to the person that makes that comment. But then there are a large people who go with whatever that first comment was, and you know, continue attacking me. So like forced to wear the hijab, or you know, like your religion promotes violence. Why is that? You know, like as if I have the answer. But so those were some of the things that I've experienced when I interact with public pages, when I comment.
Thank you, both of you, for sharing some examples. You know, I think those examples really demonstrate the difference between online hate and what that means. You know, why legislation is needed, why this event is needed. Because I think sometimes the word hate, in a way, almost can be desensitizing to some people. We use hate colloquially all the time. You know, I hate this food, I hate this color, I hate the weather, right? But when we hear the types of experiences and the comments and the awful words that you both experience regularly, it really puts into perspective what online hate feels like and how harmful it is. Now, something that both of you mentioned are the offline consequences to online hate, that there's not this boundary. It doesn't just stay in a screen, as horrible and as awful as that is. Can you share a little bit about what those offline consequences are?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it looks very, very similar as to what I mentioned, you know, what I experience online, except it's in my face. So, you know, I'll be minding my own business and, you know, I'll get these hateful comments about, you know, being on welfare. Like I get called a welfare bum quite a bit. You know, just things like that, you know, people just thinking that it's their business to comment. I get a lot of, like if I go grocery shopping or, you know, just walk into a store in general, I do get followed around, which, you know, sometimes for me, the way I deal with it is, you know, like I'll address those people who follow me around and, you know, be like, if you're gonna follow me, at least hold my basket type of thing. Just because I'm raising 2 children, and one thing that I find really important in dealing with racism is showing them how to deal with racism and how to not let it defeat you, because sometimes it can feel, it can make you feel so powerless, and it can, you know, it can take away just your humanity. And so, you know, a lot of Canadian parents don't realize that, you know, don't realize that there's an extra step to being, whether that's Indigenous or, you know, whether that's being Black, Muslim, you know, just being BIPOC as a parent. there's so many other extra steps that we have to take as parents when dealing with hate, like face to face. You know, sometimes because I support a lot of Indigenous clothing designers, I'll wear clothing proudly. And, you know, one time I had a guy threaten to kill me and, you know, call me a racist slur. I was walking with my best friend, and it was the first time I had left my house during the pandemic. And I went for a walk with my friend, and a guy just randomly called me a racial slur and said, you know, I'm going to kill you. I am also disabled, so it wasn't like, you know, I could just run. So these are the types of things that, you know, that I face as an Indigenous person living in Winnipeg, which is one of the most racist cities in Canada. And so, yeah, my life looks a little bit different than, you know, than Canadians who lack melanin, essentially.
The consequences obviously can lead to anxiety, depression, a lot what she mentioned just right now, can even lead to offline harassment because sometimes the targeted individual's address might be published, right? So online hate can create unsafe spaces where a culture of intolerance and violence is promoted, and where groups of people can come together to promote that violence and discriminatory ideologies. So the consequences are there. It's not like sometimes I do kind of think of it as like, hey, don't take it personal. You don't know these people personally. It's easy to think that way, but when you do read what they say about you, kind of like you feel bad, right? Because words are hurtful. So there are consequences, and if someone is not emotionally resilient, it gives them a lot of problems, right? Anxiety, like I said, and depression, and I'm sure there are other things that have been reported due to online hate.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think something that you both brought up is that those extra steps, you know, you have to teach yourself to be resilient. You have to teach your kids how to respond. You have to think through yourself, you know, put on that armor when you go somewhere. Those are things that not everyone has to deal with. And hearing these stories, I think, is really important, as painful as it is. And, you know, I'm in this space, I do this work, and it's painful to hear these experiences that you have on a regular basis. But at the same time, it reinforces that these are real experiences. And, you know, sometimes I think it can be too easy for people to hear some of these stories and dismiss them as an outlier. Oh, that just happened to this person. That doesn't really happen to everyone. It's just an isolated incident. Or they maybe think it's not that bad. What would you say to people that maybe don't quite understand that this is a widespread issue and not just an individual experience?
Watch TV, you know, look on any news article comment section. It is rife with people unhinged with hate and ignorance. You know, look at our laws, our laws that, you know, don't always take BIPOC people's safety and humanity, you know, into consideration. I also, you know, like looking online and seeing hate groups that are dedicated to hating specific individuals, specific cultures, specific groups of people. I know that as somebody who produces comedy shows, which you would think, how could hate pop up, you know, during a fun comedy show? No, it does come in, and you know, we have comedians all BIPOC comedians who do our shows and who receive hate and backlash, you know, just for existing, just for telling their stories, you know, as a way of taking back their power. And so, yeah, it's really not hard to see. It's not an isolated incident. When we have these things in our faces, you know, children's bodies are being exhumed, families are being plowed for walking and existing. You know, people are going into places of worship and committing acts of violence. These aren't isolated incidences. These are things that you know, are becoming a regular part of our life. So I think for people who, you know, think like, oh, it's getting better, you know, there's improvements, we have so much further to go. And it's, you know, something that we can't, you know, stop and take a break. So that's what I would say.
I would say exactly what she said, and also just to educate these individuals as well. Invite them to programs such as this, where people are sharing their lived experiences, so that way, just because it's not happening to them doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? Maybe they're not around people who have faced online hate and belittle the situation, but if they are around people who are going through these lived experiences, they might have a different perspective on how they feel about it.
Absolutely, you know, that interpersonal interaction is a core part of what we do at Mosaic to try and help mitigate these issues. And I know both of you are very active in anti-racism and anti-hate activities as well. And, you know, even with everything that you just shared about what you experienced, you still find the strength to actively work against online hate and offline hate. So I'm wondering if you could both share a little bit more about the work that you do as well, and how your experiences maybe inform the work that you do.
Sure. As I mentioned, I am a co-producer and co-founder of Vote Comedy Hour, which is a comedy platform where we feature the voices of BIPOC comedians. And so a lot of our comedians, we have Indigenous comedians, we have refugee comedians, Newcomer comedians, BIPOC across the board. And so, you know, that's one way that we deal with hate, is we take our experiences, we take those times that people try to take away our humanity, and we present it in a funny manner. And you know, that's can be really angering and triggering for a lot of racist folks, you know, realizing that the hate that they gave to us and that they, you know, shot at us, that we're taking it and we're using it as, you know, as our Patronus, you know, we're using it to our advantage. And this is how I make a living, is I take all of these experiences and moments of hate and I make fun of it. And that's how, you know, this is how I provide for my children. And it can be really bothersome for racists. Another way is I work with youth, and I work with youth in ways of education. And so one of the projects that I used to be involved with was working with Newcomer youth and Indigenous youth, and having them realize how similar their experiences are in Canada, and how you know, you have Indigenous youth who are coming from isolated communities, and, you know, having that culture shock, and a lot of them experiencing racism for the first time when they're coming to urban settings. And then, you know, with Newcomer youth, the same experience. And that's, you know, that's something that was a unique project, and lost funding for it, and so that no longer exists. And I think that's kind of the nature of the beast with this type of work, is that, you know, the government doesn't see the racism problem solved, and so, you know, it doesn't work, so your project is scrapped. And so for me, as a community member, as an anti-racist parent, I often will do a lot of that work voluntarily. So, you know, like I'll go into schools, I'll work with youth groups, just to talk about anti-racism and what that means, especially, you know, when we're living on Turtle Island, and you know, how can we coexist and cohabitate without all the hate.
Rachel, can you please just repeat the question again for me?
Absolutely. So I was just commenting that both of you had mentioned that education or lack of education is part of the reason why we see all of these types of issues. And I know that you, Naima, work in this area of anti-racism and anti-hate. And even with all of the things that you experience, you are still continuing to do this work. Can you share a little bit about the work that you do and how your experiences inform the work that you do?
Okay, so I'm currently working with youth. It's like creating a safe space where they can share their lived experiences, judgment-free zone. A lot of them can relate to each other, just kind of creating that dialogue that, hey, it's not just you that's going through it, and there are others that went through this, and this is the way they coped with it, you know, kind of help each other with our coping mechanisms and build our emotional and resiliency. So with education, obviously, it will reach many of the youth that feel like this is something that they're going through, but nobody really understands them. You know, just kind of facilitating and helping them realize that there were others, like even myself, I've been there and I still go through it. It's not a problem that's going to disappear tomorrow. So let's find a common ground where we can work together and find a way to live a comfortable life, with you being Black or Arab or from Indigenous group. Find a way that you can, you know, contribute to society positively, regardless of the impact that you're going through.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit more about what you do. And I think, you know, we are obviously all aligned in the idea that hearing each other's stories and is a way to build coping mechanisms, build that resiliency, build awareness. So it's really wonderful to be around people that are all aligned with that idea. And I know the others who are going to be speaking later today feel the same way. I know we are just about out of time for our panel. So for my last question for both of you, I just wanted to know, what is one thing that you wish people better understood about online hate and its impacts?
I wish people understood that sometimes we don't want to be resilient. Sometimes we just want to exist without, you know, having to think about what emotional impact will going on the internet today have on me. You know, like, can I get onto the internet and just look at videos of cute kittens and, you know, funny fails without having an experience of hate online? So, you know, I really wish that people knew, and sometimes that online hate isn't intentional, it's ignorance. And, you know, people don't know that what they're doing is hateful and degrading. So that's what I wish. I wish people were more mindful so that we don't have to be resilient 24/7.
I agree. I do wish that they were not as hateful as they come, and that we're just like people like them. you know? So just because someone's skin color is different than yours doesn't mean that they deserve to be mistreated or be hated on because of their skin color or religion or any different views that they have from you. We just need to learn how to accept each other. I mean, we live in a diverse country, so let's put that into application and use the diversity that we have and treat each other with kindness.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Issa and Naima, for your words today, for sharing your stories. I know it's hard and it's painful, and it's truly appreciated. And I know throughout the rest of the event today, we're going to be hearing more about how to take some of the practical steps to see your wishes come true. So thank you again, and I will turn it back over to Yusuf.
Thank you so much. Again, guys, what we heard today, it is the reality for millions of people. The experiences that Issa and Naima shared today are not just stories, but they're the lives of our neighbors, our friends, and even our family members who are BIPOC, which is an acronym for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. In 2021, for instance, we saw a dramatic increase in anti-Asian hate, crimes and assaults against Asian women, men, and children, as well as elders. In Canada, there was a 717% increase in hate crimes targeting the Asian community members in Vancouver. A Bloomberg research report found that Vancouver had become the anti-Asian hate capital of the world. The Atlanta city shootings in the United States on March 16th, which saw 6 Asian women killed by a white gunman. There was multiple reasons for that, but he targeted Asian women. Was a culmination of years of rising anti-Asian rhetoric, discriminatory practices, stereotypes, and dehumanization, particularly online during the COVID-19 pandemic. The stereotypes and the memes and the insults contribute to an ecosystem where people feel that they can attack people who, in their eyes, have become dehumanized. Over the last few months, there has been a shocking spate of attacks against visibly Muslim women, most of whom were Black, in Alberta. Over 20 people were attacked. Many of them had their headscarves pulled off. They were insulted, threatened, physically assaulted, and shot at just because they were who they were. Some were walking down the street. Some were walking with their friends in a park. Some were even just sitting in the car and they were pulled out and attacked. In London, Ontario, we saw a terrorist deliberately ramming his pickup truck into a visibly Muslim Pakistani Canadian family at an intersection as the family was out for a walk. He murdered 3 generations of one family in one instant with that action. The medium by which many of these people's worldview is being shaped, their minds being infected with the virus, is the online format. It is not just fun and games. It is in many instances the real world nowadays. And just what happens in real life when we walk outside, we're governed by laws to protect society, to protect each other. As we can see, there is a need here for legislation to protect ourselves online. Our next speaker, Mohammed Hashem, is the Executive Director of the Canadian Race Relations Federation. Mohammed is, he's a founding advisor as well of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, and he also sits on the Board of Trustees of the United Way of Greater Toronto. Now, the purpose of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation is to facilitate throughout Canada the development, sharing, and application of knowledge and expertise in order to contribute to the elimination of racism and all forms of racial discrimination in our society. Thank you so much for joining us, Mohammed. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. First, I want to just acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, which is also here in Mississauga, Ontario. I've had a lot of difficult conversations over the last number of days and weeks with people, particularly from the Muslim community. I've been involved with activism in this community for a very long time, and it's just been one thing after the next. I think when we see violence so frequently it makes you feel targeted, just consistently targeted. I know I've spoken to seniors, I've spoken to family members who are honestly for the first time in many years contemplating whether they do take off their job, whether they do not go out for a walk outside, whether they as seniors leave their homes, because that sense of fear is just getting exacerbated again and again and again by all these different events that are happening. And part of it is a bit difficult to explain. When, to be frank, when Trump was around, there was always a sense of where there's somebody that's pointing the finger towards us, or when other politicians of the past were around and using their microphones and their platforms to point towards Muslim communities, there was a sense that there is a reason why this is coming towards us in particular. But now, for the most part, and obviously there's glaring examples that will counter this, but for the most part, federally at least, you don't see any discussion about whether or not Islamophobia exists or doesn't exist. For the most part, politicians agree that there is a bit of a consensus around Islamophobia, that it exists, that it's wrong, and that it needs to be tackled with. So if it's not coming from, if it's not, maybe that inspiration for that violence may not be coming from political voices. If it's not coming from political voices, where is it coming from? Is it just, has Islamophobia seeped in? Is it just that the violence towards Muslims is just now becoming so much more frequent because this is the last gasp of air of the political movements that were inspired previously and are now on their last gasp of air? Or is it that the sense of dehumanization of Muslims has just gone so deep that it's just there, and that this is just now going to escalate? Is it going up? Is it going down? And I think there's not an honest answer to that, and I don't know what it is that is particularly driving it in this current moment. Obviously, COVID has had a different has had numerous impacts on different on people in very different ways. Is it that contributing towards it? It's very difficult to say. But the one thing that has been consistently true over the last years is just that the environment around information has just consistently been getting worse and worse and worse. And the reason why I point to that is because, when the internet was created, and for some of us who remember when the internet was created, it was seen as a place of freedom where anything could be said, anything could go, that ideas will free flowly, and therefore it is a space of ultimate freedom. So the expectation of the internet being that place has existed and has allowed people to walk around and say and do things that would never be allowed in society. You can't walk up to somebody in your town square and say the most horrific things like people do online. Like first and foremost, like people would just not tolerate that. But also, there's an anonymity that exists online that allows you to say those things without having to deal with the repercussions of it. And what I know now more so than ever before is that this environment is problematic. It's deeply problematic because there's no checks and balances, because there's no ability to curtail it in a way that has some semblance of sensibility towards each other or decency towards each other, that ensures that an environment is protected to provide for people to equally access it, enjoy it, and be able to use it. it's just letting too much hate fester and foster. And it's happening again and again and again. And maybe what we're just seeing now is just the most violent expressions of what we've seen the environment change to be. And maybe that what's happening, like the targeting of Canadian Muslims that we've seen recently and particularly, is just chickens coming home to roost. Maybe we left that environment too open, and now this is what we're having to deal with. So I'm encouraged by the conversation today. I wish I had the courage that Isa had in terms of being able to make fun of him versus versus absorbing the pain and the trauma, because that is an act of courage, and I commend them for it. But it's difficult. And I would also just say one last thing. What we're seeing now is not happening in isolation. Black communities have faced oppression for many years, centuries. Indigenous people the same as well here in North America, or on Turtle Island particularly. But I think that what's really important is that we need to be able to identify how this actually is manifested. And I'll give you a quick example. In London, Ontario, when you saw the person drive and mow over 4 people, 2 days later, there was a vigil held. Every single politician from literally every single level that represented that area came and spoke there. But in Brossard, Quebec, there was an Asian woman who was 53 years old and an Asian man who was 50 years old, who were run over once on one street, a couple of streets over, and then the man was run over. 2 people were run over by the same person in the same incident in 2 different streets. And the community felt like this was targeted, because maybe it was. It felt that way. But the police never called it a hate crime. The police never said that it was, that it could have been hate motivated at all. They just called it a hit and run, and that was it. And the impact of that was huge on the community, because they were never able to hear the words that it was hate motivated, or gave them any sense of safety because of what they looked like. They knew that they knew that there was a potential that they were being targeted, but that was never voiced or heard, nor was their pain recognized. No politician came and spoke there, nor was there any political reaction towards it. It was just, it happened, people felt that pain, and they were asked to basically move on. And I think that's an important thing to remember, because recognizing people's pain, particularly because of hate, is an important way for them to heal and move to the next step. And sometimes that happens and sometimes that doesn't happen in communities. But I think it's important for us to recognize, because many of us over here probably never even heard of what happened in Brossard, but it did. And I think it's important to make sure that we stay connected to each other. And I appreciate the organizers bringing us all together to talk about this, to understand each other's perspectives. And I hope to contribute in this conversation as we go forward. Thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to continuing to support the work that's happening amongst all of you.